Welcome to the Scandinavian Mind podcast, our weekly show about how technology is changing the creative industries. Today on the program, insights from Global Fashion Summit. We are reporting from the fashion industry's biggest sustainability conference that took place in Copenhagen last week. We were on the ground conducting interviews and listening to the talks, and in this episode we will give our key takeaways from the event and share a conversation with Faith Robinson from Global Fashion Agenda, the organization behind the event. My name is Konrad Olsson, editor-in-chief and founder of Scandinavian Mind, and I'm here with my dear colleague, our editor-at-large and man on the ground, Oliver Dahle. How are you, Oliver?
It's all good, thank you, Konrad, and quite energized after a few intense days in Copenhagen last week. So all good, and happy to be back on the podcast.
Well, great to have you back, and great to have you back in Stockholm after your stint in Copenhagen. I feel like we're just scratching the surface in this episode, giving an overview of the Global Fashion Summit. I know you've been there doing plenty more interviews that we will share in the Scandinavian Mind platform in the weeks to come, including in this podcast. But maybe we should start. Well, and also we should say we published yesterday your kind of 5 takeaways from the event. So anyone who wants a proper rundown of what happened in Copenhagen, you can go in and read that. But I think in this episode we'll share a teaser of that reporting as well. But I guess to begin with, Oliver, maybe just kind of describe the event. We've talked about it before, and anyone in the fashion industry kind of knows what it is. But how would you describe this event going into it?
Yeah, so the summit itself celebrated 15 years this edition. So it started in 2009 in Copenhagen and was then founded by Eva Kruse, which is the founder of both the Danish Fashion Institute and the very celebrated Copenhagen Fashion Week. And the reason why she started it was that in 2009, COP15 was going to be held in Copenhagen, and fashion wasn't on the agenda at all. So Kruse, fashion professional, then thought that this is bonkers. We need to discuss these very pressing questions somewhere as well. And imagine, like, this was 15 years ago. There was one moderator during one of the talks that were like, could you just take 1 minute to imagine where you were 15 years ago? Which was like, especially for me, like quite a big awakening. I was still in, I was starting high school back then, and I had not really any plans of working in fashion. I liked fashion. I certainly didn't have any plans of like even scratching the surface of sustainability. So like looking at it um, with that background is quite mind-boggling. Yeah. But yeah, so that's what happened in the years past, and of course it's grown to become such a huge thing now. I was discussing with a colleague about the event, and we both said that this is more intense than the actual fashion week because there is so many things that is happening at the same time.
Yeah.
And since everyone's there, there is so much people that you meet or would like to meet or grab a coffee with that you usually is just emailing with. So it's so much things happening. Like there during the 2 summit days, there are 3 different stages in which talks are going in parallel. There was specifically round tables which were discussing specific issues with invited companies, brands, NGOs, so on and so forth. After the summit, it's events, during the evenings. It's different dinners and yeah, like yeah, different helicopter events supporting the actual summit. So yeah, there is a lot of things going on, and all of it is, of course, discussing sustainability in one way or another.
Right.
So, yeah.
Right. So let's get into some of the topics that were discussed and that you kind of highlighted in your report that we published yesterday. Just to begin with, what was kind of the sense? I'm always curious to hear the taking kind of the temperature on the chit chatter between the panels, between the keynotes. Are people positive, optimistic? Is it overwhelming? What is the kind of sense when being present at the event?
First of all, as with all of these events, I think you talked about this when you went to Pity this winter, that the biggest thing is that people are actually meeting each other, and all these like
Mm,
small meetings in between, or like just saying hi to some acquaintances that you haven't met in since last time, things like that. Like that's the biggest thing. But the high, like the overall feeling is very positive. Like people are very like driven to make a change, and are like actually believing that change is happening. And of course there is like points of like, or reality checks that is saying like, oh, we aren't doing that good, we have only completed 15% of the goals that we need to accomplish before 2030. Greenhouse gas emissions are actually becoming more and more. So of course there is those more negative aspects that is being highlighted, but the overall feeling, which of course is shaded by the fact that everyone there is both working in fashion and have a very strong sense of sustainability, which makes everyone believe that we will make this, which I guess is
mm.
like, if you wouldn't have that sense and go to this summit, that would be, I guess, quite depressing.
Well, I guess that's kind of the double-edged sword. I spoke to a person in the industry actually earlier today that was there, saying that it is kind of eerie in a way that everyone who is there is so optimistic and so into it, and it becomes kind of like a kind of preaching to the choir kind of thing. But I guess like I guess it's inevitable with an event like this, because you wouldn't go unless you're really passionate about this issue. And how else could you run an event like this? I guess we feel kind of the same thing with our own transformation conference. Sometimes the people that show up, the people we invite, they are really into it. So I mean, that's kind of what happens. So but I think let's get into some of the, just tease a little bit of the takeaways. What I thought was interesting that you highlighted in your story was there were some talks of new AI solutions. Of course, this year 2024 we should talk about AI. Can you mention a couple of those companies that you talked to?
Yeah, so of course, one of the people I was speaking to was Ahmed Saidi, which is the CEO and co founder of a company called Hiran Technologies. And one of the biggest issues, like when you get down to it, is that we produce too much clothes today. And a lot of that is because people aren't really, or people, brands, manufacturers don't really know how much they need of something. So at this point, it's easier for them to just produce more than they would actually need and then
Mm,
sell it with markdowns in the end. It's a crooked business model, which is bad for, yeah, the company in the long run, but most first and foremost bad for the environment. So he has then been working with AI technology on like, how could you do different predictions on like how things will go, or which sort of garments should be put into production? Could you see that maybe like a high risk product could be put on hold, or do we have to spin the yarn into a weave and then not be able to sell it? So through different predictions, it could actually tell what will actually sell in the future.
Mm.
And then there is another company also working with AI called whyFaith, which is measuring emissions with the help of AI, and could help brands to pinpoint which focus areas they should have to actually lower their emissions and lower their carbon footprint, which is very cool company. So yeah, those are two of many that utilizes artificial intelligence to actually move this needle forward.
Good stuff. We'll actually cover this more in the weeks to come, and we have a longer interview with Ahmed planned for the podcast. So we'll get back to that. All right. So maybe we should just dive into your conversation with Faith Robinson. So, Faith Robinson is from the Global Fashion Agenda, which is the organization behind the Global Fashion Summit. Why did you decide to speak to Faith?
So Faith is the head of content of a global fashion agenda. So she works with the curation of the theme, which speakers they are inviting, and what are the talks going to delve into, and which talks are happening at what stage, and things like that, which obviously is quite interesting to learn more about. But one question that I also raised with her is the fact that, as you said in the beginning, a lot of these conversations could end up just being preaching to the choir. But
Mm,
at Global Fashion Summit, you see quite a vast portfolio of brands and companies being present. You have
mm.
startups, you have global chains, you have the big conglomerates. So, how could you platform these people that often are seen as the bad guys in the fashion industry? How could you give them a platform, and how could you make them actually speak in a place where everyone is so convinced of what is the right way and right thing to do?
All right, let's get into it. Here now, Oliver Dahle in conversation with Faith Robinson from Global Fashion Agenda.
So, for the event, how have you done the curation?
Yeah, each year for each flagship event, and that's where we are now at the Global Fashion Agenda Copenhagen edition 2024, we pick an editorial theme that will help lead us through the year. A theme that can help rally our community together, a simple message that reflects the mood of where we find ourselves as an industry. So last year our theme was ambition to action, and that theme took us right through 2023 with different events that we do. And this year we wanted to build on that focus on action. So we decided on the theme, unlocking the next level. I like the theme because it's really fun to work with. And I say that because it's kind of operational, right? It's asking us to firstly imagine what the next level is, and articulate that in our organizations, in our minds as people, and then it invites us to collaborate and unlock that next level together. So I find the theme really fun to work with, and it's a simple way to sort of build the content around that. So across 2 days, we have 33 different content segments at this event, and we're trying to unlock something within each of those sessions. And each session is connected to one of those 5 priorities I mentioned before. So we're really trying to connect everything we learn and all the insights we gather from this event with what's come before at GFA, which is many years of thought leadership, research, and consultation with the industry.
But I've been asking a lot of different panelists, speakers, and thought leaders about what they think of when they hear unlock the next level. Like, how have you been talking about it internally? What does the next level mean for you at GFA?
Well, we're answering that as an organisation with a new report. It's the 2024 edition of the CEO Agenda, the Unlocking the Next Level edition. And we've put together that short report by taking some really fascinating research calls with our partners. So the 2024 edition of the Fashion CEO Agenda presents 5 kind of key opportunities or unlocks. And we've come to these insights through research with our partners and just picking up on what's happening in our world and in our industry. So those different opportunities that we're trying to unlock with the summit are operationalizing sustainability, redefining growth, activating consumers, prioritizing people, and mobilizing based on materiality. So these 5 kind of opportunities, we see those as the major unlocks to get to that next level. And for us at GFA, our vision is a net positive fashion industry, ultimately. So that's an industry that gives back more to the economy, the environment, and to the people than it takes. And it's a big, lofty ambition, but that's where we would like to see the industry led to. So I suppose that's the next level for us.
How will you, of course, there's so much conversation and talks happening here, and people saying that they are going to start to collaborate with each other, finding solutions together, and like actually measuring or like looking back that all these things are happening.
Yeah, it's a huge community that we convene here at the summit, a global community. And we're always looking for new ways to collect feedback from the people that attend. So we do that by a survey that comes out after the event, and that's an important way for us to capture commitments, I guess, from the industry, but also just the experience of people. And this year, we're really excited about how engaged everyone is with the Summit app, because that's where we can kind of analyse the engagement around certain topics. We can review the types of questions that were asked, and understand where the energy is in terms of what the industry wants and needs. So when you ask about measuring the impact of the summit, it's something we're still working on at GFA. We have the ambition to capture as much as we can, but it's very hard to quantify how inspired someone is from attending the event, or put a data measure on how coming to something like this changed their career trajectory, for example. So I think there's lots of small stories that I'm personally really excited about collecting somehow.
Yeah, definitely. But there's like also those concrete actions that might just end up being talks here in Copenhagen, and then people are going back to Milan, Paris, New York, and just like forget about this in a week.
Yeah, and it's a busy industry, and we know that the community who come to this summit are very busy working on all of the strategies that they already have. But I think ultimately a summit like this is about inspiring, about educating, and about mobilizing people around the mission in terms of accountability on specific commitments that have been made here. It's something that we wish to track, but at the same time, the sustainability journey has to have a long-term view. So commitments that are made might not necessarily come through within the next year. Having said that, one really good example of an initiative that is rolling and has the next level of it has been launched here today is the Ellen MacArthur Foundation's Remodel initiative, which was launched officially yesterday and on our panel here today. It's like the next phase of a previous circularity project they've done. So we find ourselves now at the 15-year anniversary of the summit in a place where we've actually got a foundation for these projects now. We know what it takes. We really encourage the people who come here to be open and vulnerable about what hasn't worked as well.
Putting together the content for the summit, I know that within the fashion industry there is very easy to like point towards maybe certain companies or conglomerates that these are the bad guys. How do you approach that and to actually give them a sort of spotlight without just thrown into the lion cage? You get what I mean?
Yeah, totally. I think what you're getting at is, how do we decide who we platform and why? I think it's nice. It's important to explain that GFA, we're a multi-stakeholder initiative, so we work with and are supported by lots of different organisations, from data companies to other non-profits, to brands. And historically at GFA, working with brands has been a big part of our theory of change. So over the last 15 years, we've built relationships with these companies that has allowed us to appreciate and understand when the ambition actually becomes real. And our partners are really open with us on their climate transition plans, for example, the due diligence they're working on in their supply chain, the collaborative projects, the investments they're making. So we're really, really proud to work with the partners that we have, even though they represent different parts of the value chain. And there's lots of other partners in the industry who maybe wouldn't be such a great fit, or maybe you don't see them on the stage.
Looking at the summit in Copenhagen here, we're like 3 hours away from being finished. What have been your biggest highlights?
Yeah, well, as head of content, I'm producing this summit too. So I've spent the last many months with my amazing team and colleagues putting together a programme of over 100 people, representing 6 different continents, over 20 countries. We've spent a lot of time really focusing on the content, and everyone comes to the summit very prepped. But that means I don't actually get to experience that much of it live. So my highlight so far has actually been the connections with people. I think that the relationships we nurture and create at Global Fashion Summit are important. And to witness those in the backstage area, to witness those in the networking, I think that's the glue that binds the whole thing together in many ways. So for me, that's the highlight. But I can share some content points as well. One of them has been the launch of Conservation International's Indigenous Principles report. This is something that at Global Fashion Agenda we're really proud to be involved in, and have a great track record now at the summit of platforming Indigenous leaders as sustainability experts to lead this transition. So for me, this was a highlight. It was a panel discussion outlining where we stand in terms of Indigenous engagement and leadership in an industry point of view, and that's long overdue to be taken much more seriously and strategically. So that was a highlight. Another highlight was the closing keynote of yesterday, where we presented a conversation called When Skills and Stories Combine. And this was a fireside chat where we got to hear the perspective of Adeju Thompson, who runs the label Lagos Space Programme. And this is a creative for whom sustainability is so inherent in the cultural and creative approach to his work that it was very refreshing to balance our industry discussions with something that's a little bit more spiritual, creative and human. And then let me think of a third one. Well, we've still got 3 hours at the summit to go, or 2. So some of my highlights are coming up. But from today, we opened this morning with a fantastic conversation called 15 Years of Activating Impact, where we invited back 4 of the voices from the very first summit in 2009, including the summit's founder, Eva Cruz, who's still on the board of Global Fashion Agenda. And this was a moment to take stock, reflect, and understand what has and hasn't happened in those 15 years and why.
Mm.
So I thought that was quite a beautiful moment on stage, that it was just a pleasure to hear from such amazing people.
Mm. At the summit in Copenhagen here, we're like 3 hours away from being finished. What have been your biggest highlights? Like,
Yeah, well, as head of content, I'm producing this summit too. So I've spent the last many months with my amazing team and colleagues putting together a program of over 100 people, representing 6 different continents, over 20 countries. We've spent a lot of time really focusing on the content, and everyone comes to the summit very prepped. But that means I don't actually get to experience that much of it live. So my highlight so far has actually been the connections with people. I think that the relationships we nurture and create at Global Fashion Summit are important. And to witness those in the backstage area, to witness those in the networking, I think that's the glue that binds the whole thing together in many ways. So for me, that's the highlight.
All right, that was Faith Robinson from Global Fashion Agenda. All right, so Oliver, as we mentioned, you brought with you much more content from Copenhagen. Maybe we should tease 1 or 2 of these interviews or topics that we want to lift in the platform in the weeks to come.
yeah, so one thing that I attended, which was quite interesting, was that the H&M group invited the day before the actual summit, invited media, academia, people from different NGOs to a closed roundtable talk. So together with their sustainability executives, we had nearly 2.5 hour long talk about sustainability questions, in which they were very open about and open to receive feedback on what they were doing. So maybe we hear something from that in the near future.
Good stuff. Looking forward to come back to all your reporting, Oliver. And before we close out, of course, we are in the middle of the transformation conference season here at Scandinavian Mind. I just came back from Helsinki, where we hosted this year's first conference. Super happy about that event, hosted together with Uni Communication during the Fashion in Helsinki days. Our colleague Johan Magnusson is still in Helsinki as we speak, reporting from all the other events happening, and he will be on the podcast next week to talk about his impressions. And I'm sitting here planning for the upcoming Copenhagen and Stockholm editions of Transformation Conference. So we will come to Stockholm at SIF during Copenhagen Fashion Week on August 9, and to Stockholm Fashion District on August 27. So if you or your company or your organization wants to engage with, participate, be in the audience, sponsor any of these events, you can still reach out and we'll make something happen. You can just reach me at Konrad@scandinavianmind.com. All right, Oliver, thank you so much for reporting from Copenhagen this week. Looking forward to having you back on the podcast.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.